Turn that on, that helps. Test 1, 2. Do you hear me remotely? Great. Okay, let's see what else. Let's see. Spencer, how do you feel about taking notes? How do you feel about taking notes?
Oh God, no. I have a note from Sean Turner. The notes that I did for him yesterday in Wish were maybe the worst I think I've ever done.
All right, so apparently, yes.
You stop.
Yeah, Stefan, I think has done my notes like the last 3 AVT-Core meetings, so I think he's justifiably excused.
If I might point out, there may be people online.
That's true. There are people online.
Hello.
Let's see. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Are you volunteering to take notes?
No. We're having technical difficulties here, and we're just trying to figure out if we were being heard or not. So thank you.
You are now being
You're
heard.
being
Yes.
heard, but if you speak up again, you'll be the note taker.
As he quickly mutes. Let's see. Who do we see here? Sergio's presenting. Let's see.
David, would you be interested in taking notes?
All right. Well. All right. So let's see. I'm going to start randomly clicking on people in the participants list and telling them, asking them if they can take notes.
I can do one.
Okay, Magnus says he will take notes. Thank you, Magnus. But if other people want to also join the CodeMD or whatever we're calling it now, what? Hedge Doc. They keep changing the name.
Yes.
And keep an eye on whether you think he's captured everything. That would also be great. At which point, I think since it is now 1:34, we can get started. Welcome to the AVT Core Working Group, either here in Philadelphia or wherever in the world you might happen to be. That's right, Bernard's driving the slides. Okay, if you're here in person, please sign into the Meetico, usually the Meetico Lite if you're here in person. That both lets you join the queue and make sure you're recorded on the blue sheets. And lets you participate if we do any polls, all of which are good things. If you're here in person and you choose to join the full version, keep your audio and video off because you can already see us the old-fashioned way. And please, everybody's doing that well now, but please keep, if you're here in the room, please keep your masks on unless you're actively speaking at the front of the room. If you're remote, keep your don't send audio or video unless you are presenting during a session or asking a question. And use of the headset is strongly recommended because sometimes the echo cancellation doesn't work right. Next. remote meeting tips. You enter the queue with the no hand, leave with hand, because who knows why. You'll need to enable your audio when it's your turn to talk. Similarly, the unmuting icons, you can also enable video if you want, but that's separate from audio. If you just enable your video, we will see you but not hear you, which for most purposes is not terribly useful. Video is encouraged, but not required. Next. Here are some links. You can't click on them in here, but you can go to the, if you go to the data tracker, you can find various information. You can find the slides, and they should be clickable in there, I think. Next. Note well, hopefully everybody has seen this by now since it's Thursday, but if not, you are agreeing to, by participating in the IETF, you're agreeing to follow the IETF procedures. Notably, you have to declare if you have IPR. That's an oversimplification. Please read the things for more details. You acknowledge that we can have audio and video recordings of you, and you agree to follow the code of conduct. Next. Especially, please, everybody keep things professional and avoid harassing anybody or the like. And if you see anybody harassing, contact the ombuds team or the chairs. Next. And as I mentioned, mask policy, we seem to be good now, but please, if when you're in the meeting rooms, please wear a certified mask unless you're actively speaking at the front of the room. Next. Here's about this meeting. We have Magnus as a note taker. As mentioned, if other people want to join the hedge doc and back him up, I'm sure he would appreciate it. I will keep an eye on the chat to the extent that I can while doing everything else. If you need something relayed, if your audio isn't working for whatever reason and you're remote, please type into the chat and we can repeat what you said into the room. Next.
We're going to ask Eve to say a few words about Steve Kastner. Eve?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity to say a few words about Steve Kastner, a longtime friend and colleague and mentor to many of us within the IETF community. These remarks are a slightly longer version of the tribute prepared for the plenary yesterday, and they include a few additional photos and links to a few online readings, writings, and viewings. For those of you who may not have had the pleasure of knowing Steve directly, his vision and leadership were instrumental to the success of IETF multimedia standards and protocols that have driven the success of IP-based telephony and multimedia conferencing, as well as other real-time multicast and unicast applications. He began that journey at Occidental College. He graduated in 1973 with a degree in mathematics, and then he obtained a master's in computer science from the University of Southern California in 1976. Beginning in 1974, he joined USC's Information Sciences Institute as a graduate student and remained there for 22 years. He contributed to the software design and implementation of some of the earliest experiments with packet voice on the ARPANET, and thus he contributed to the publication of the network voice protocol RFC 741, published in 1977, a year before the TCP/IP split and a year before UDP was defined. As high bandwidth packet satellite and terrestrial networks became operational in the 1980s, he led the multimedia conferencing project at ISI to develop and deploy packet video over those networks. He built a custom packet-oriented video codec and later developed techniques that allowed commercial video codecs designed for circuits to operate over packet switch networks. It was at ISI in 1988, hate to confess that I first met Steve. I date myself. But I had the privilege to work closely with him over 6.5 years. It is also where I was indoctrinated through him into the IETF community culture and working group process. That same year, in 1988, Steve is documented in the proceedings of the IETF 11 as having participated in his first IETF meeting in Annapolis, Maryland. And as many of you may recall, his lovely wife of over 40 years, Karen Kastner, often attended IETF meetings with him. At that time, Steve attended to contribute to the working group focused on the experimental Internet Stream Protocol version 2 that provided the technical underpinnings of the earliest ISI BBN packet video teleconferencing system. ST, as it was known, however, was connection-oriented, not datagram like IP. It included a small header using per-hop identifiers and supported point-to-point or point-to-multi-point connections, as well as providing network bandwidth reservation, what would later become RFC 1190. Steve would go on to found the Audio Video Transport Working Group, AVT, facets of which live on today in Avtcore. He served as its chair. He served later as co-chair from 1991 until 2003. He authored 15 RFCs and most notably was an author and the principal editor of the Real-Time Transport Protocol, RTP specification, which has had a huge impact, as you all know, on multimedia data transmission in, on, and across the internet. Steve regularly acknowledged that RTP's design drew significantly from the earlier network voice protocol and its sister protocol, the packet video protocol, the designs of which were spearheaded by the late Danny Cohen, who ran the networking division at ISI. Beginning in 1992, Steve was the primary organizer of the movement to establish the worldwide Internet Multicast Backbone, affectionately referred to as the M-Bone, an experimental virtual network overlaying the internet for broadcast of audio and video using multicast IP and RTP-based applications. It was launched, in case you didn't know this, at the request of Allison Menken, who was pregnant at the time and unable to travel to the upcoming IETF meetings. The M-Bone enabled live streaming of IETF meetings, including return audio from remote participants. And in many ways, the M-Bone tools were the precursor to our hybrid MeetEcho meetings and the precursor to the multitude of video conferencing apps in our lives today. The M-Bone also carried the first internet radio broadcasts. It provided audio chat rooms for network geeks, streamed NASA TV of the first Hubble repair, broadcasted a Rolling Stones concert, resulting in a Newsweek article boldly displaying Steve Kastner, Van Jacobson, and Steve Deering as our modern-day superheroes, and demonstrated the first distributed music performance with distributed performers at the ACM Multimedia 94 conference. In 1995, Steve took his expertise into the commercial arena to further develop conferencing and streaming apps at Precept Software, later acquired by Cisco Systems in 1998, where he was a distinguished engineer. From 2000 until retiring in 2014, he shifted gears to work on network performance measurement and routing analysis as a fellow at Packet Design. In retirement, he continued to work on various projects, such as volunteering for the Computer History Museum to produce an operational emulation of the 1960s era IBM 1620 computer, a room-sized computer where he first got his start in coding as an undergrad at Occidental College. As a brilliant engineer, Steve also enjoyed sharing his creations with others, one of the more unique ones being his solid-state digital Monopoly game that he first showcased at the PC Festival in Anaheim in 1978, which he continued to tinker with and improve over the decades, but deliberately tried to preserve the usage of the technology from the era when it was first created. At the same time he was pushing the envelope of internet architecture, Steve also was an early adopter of electric vehicle technology and fit his house with solar panels decades ago. Not surprisingly, he enjoyed helping debug the early Tesla Roadster EV before it was released to the public. And yes, that's a picture of some of the earliest Roadster owners on a group road trip down the coast of California, photo taken out of the back of Steve's red Roadster, hopefully by the passenger and not the driver. For those of you who had the privilege to work with Steve, you know firsthand that he had an encyclopedic knowledge about anything and everything with which he became involved. And he enjoyed being a keeper of the prehistory of the internet's evolution toward packet audio and video. His attention to detail was unrivaled by anybody I have ever met, whether it was in bringing the real-time transport protocol to life or in rebuilding historical electronics. His meticulousness motivated those of us lucky enough to collaborate with him to bring our best selves to the task at hand. And in addition to his wisdom, Steve was the consummate role model for quiet leadership, humility, and kindness. In 2011, he was awarded the 2011 Leadership Award by the International Multimedia Teleconferencing Consortium. And in 2020, he was the co-recipient of the IEEE Internet Award, having been nominated by his AVT co-chair, Colin Perkins, whose wise words I paraphrase here. Steve has long provided an example of how an IETF working group chair should act, with humility and fairness, while building on a deep understanding of the underlying technology and systems architecture. He saw consensus where none seemed possible. He would patiently listen to all sides of an argument, identify the concerns, correct misunderstandings of the architecture, and then quietly, carefully, and respectfully help the working group come to consensus. It is without doubt that Steve's technical and leadership contributions were essential to the success of RTP in particular, and internet multimedia standards and protocols in general. Steve passed away on the morning of July 4th, 2022, an auspicious date in the US, celebrated as Independence Day. When the fireworks began in the evening this July 4th, I couldn't help but imagine the fireworks were celebrating Steve's life, all that he accomplished, and all the people whose lives he touched. In conclusion, and to echo the sentiments of the many people who reached out to me after my posting to the IETF list about Steve's passing, it was truly a gift to have worked with him. Steve, you will be sorely missed. For those of you who wish to send condolences to his family, or to know further details about the memorial to be held in August, or to donate to the endowed chair in computer science that he and Karen seated with the honorarium from the IEEE Internet Award and that was established for the newly created CS department at his alma mater, please reach out to me. Next slide. I assembled a few pointers to readings and writings and viewings for those of you who might like to reminisce a little bit further. Thank you again for this opportunity to share some thoughts with you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to say a few words about Steve? Okay, thank you.
Oh, Magnus is coming up.
Oh, Magnus, okay.
Is that on? Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so Magnus Westland. Yeah, I mean, I replaced or tried to replace Steve Kastner as co-chair of AVT back in 2003. Very large shoes to try to step after, and provided very good role model for how to be a chair and go on. And I think it's been very important for my development in IETF, so I will keep on remembering.
Colin?
Yeah, I have I think little to add that hasn't been said already. There are some very big shoes to fill. Steve was, I think, the role model for how a chair should behave. Always, as Eve said, always incredibly well prepared, incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly polite, incredibly tactful, and willing to work to gauge consensus. And it was very much a privilege to work with him, and I hope I lived up to those shoes when I joined as co-chair. I hope it would be an example for many in the IETF, I think, of the way he chaired groups. He'll be missed.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, now on to our regular agenda, which I'm sure he would want us to continue to work on. So we're going to start with Cryptex, with Sergio, and the DVC payload format, the SCIP payload format, 7983 BIS, which is the demultiplexing, and then two things in RTP over quick, both the RTP proper and the SDP, and then V3C and green metadata. Any objections, or shall we continue? Okay, seems good. Next. Next slide, Bernard. Bernard? Maybe I should take over doing the slides. I don't know. Bernard, are you there? All right, let's see. I'm going to take over driving the slides. No, that's not what I wanted to do. How do I? Oh no, I do this. And yes. Right. Okay. Yeah. So draft status. We have published RTT multi-party RTT mix and JPEG XS. VP9 is still in misref, waiting indirectly on frame marking. Does everybody still hear us for the remote people? Making sure that we didn't lose anybody when I did that. I see some people unmuting themselves. Okay, somebody says so she'll hear
Yeah.
you fine, so that's good.
Yeah,
All right,
we're good.
Good, thank you. Yeah, maybe Bernard got called away from his desk. And yeah, we've done last call on cryptex and VVC. We'll have some comments on the IETF last call on cryptex and VVC. We'll have some comments on those. Well, somebody says there's no slides. Do other people have slides? You know, we're on, if you want to get it, things aren't working
Yeah,
right.
we can see them. Or I
Okay, you
see
can,
them.
great. Okay, good. Oh, you're back, Bernard, great. Yeah, so, yeah, so, and then, and we did, we need a revised ID on frame marking. So Mo is nodding in the back of the room, so hopefully that means that will happen soon. Yes, and then working group last call completed on skip and 793 BIS. We'll have discussions of those. And we have adopted RTP over quick. And we did a call for adoption on game state over RTP, which we'll talk about next slide, I think it is. Yes, so on game state over RTP, there were only 2 responses, one of whom was the same organization as the initial proposer. So our suggestion is that the proponents go to the community. I get the impression that the interested community here is not the usual suspects we get here in the Avtcore group. So we're asking, and I've asked Cullen this also personally, asking them to go and try to get some people to express interest in the document. And we will extend our call for adoption until sometime in September so that people can do it after August vacations. So if
Yeah. I guess one question is, do we know who the core constituency is so we can actually reach them, which presumably we didn't do the last time?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we should do is we should ask, I mean, Colin Jennings as the person who proposed this to talk to, I mean, I think he knows who the community is, so we should ask him to ask them to come and indicate their interest in this, if they are still interested. All right, next cryptics, Sergio.
Hi, hello. So next slide, please. So the current status of the draft is that since we submitted it for ISG review, we have received 39 comments of feedback between the ISG review, IANA, and STP directorate review. So all the non-contentious feedback has been incorporated into the draft, and there are 3 feedback that I consider it as one fix that I will explain later, and 8 open, still open issues that it is what I am going to explain during this meeting. So we try to get feedback from them and try to see how to address them. Some of them is just call to action, so it's deciding if we agree on the feedback and if we incorporate it or not. So I think that most of the will be easy to explain, but not sure if easy to get a consensus. So next slide, please. So the one fix issues is the first one was the use of inclusive language. This was mainly because of the term master key. That I don't think that I can change it in the draft because it is referencing the master key term in the RFC 3711. So I think that if we have to change, or for changing the draft, the grifted draft, we'll have to also update the RFC 3711 to update and remove the master key term and replace it for something else. And then the next one was a request to see if we can provide more details about the fingerprint issues about the RTP, the usage of the RTP header extension, a part of what it is already shown in or described in the header extension RFC. I don't think that there is anything else that I can reference. So that's what I have considered this as not fixed. If anyone has any draft or any publication that we can link, it will be great. But if not, I think that we cannot do much more on this. And the last one was about checking if we should register the 2 new values for the defined by profile, that the value that was incorporated in the draft, but there is no IANA register already for these values. So I don't think that it is something that Cryptech needs to solve. If it should be done in either RFC 8285 or even in the RFC 3550. So I don't, because again, I don't think that Cryptech should just add a IANA register. If on the other draft that define these values and define the register, we could add the values that we have defined in the draft. So any feedback about these issues?
Murray?
This is Murray about the IANA question. So does that mean we're okay with those values just being registered in a scattering of RFCs, and we're okay with that? I'm just making sure.
Yeah, I think I mean, these are, I think, the second and third ever defined for, sorry, maybe third and fourth ever defined for this value. And I think, I think at some point it might be useful to do a registry if we ever get any more of these, but I wouldn't recommend blocking this draft on that. I'm okay with it.
Okay, I guess the other option is, like, do you want to make a separate document that just, all it does is create the registry and collect values, and you could do that too.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I just wanted to see, like.
I think, I think that might be worth doing if we ever get another one, but for now, I think it's probably not necessary.
Okay.
So next slide, please. So there was another one issue raised by IANA, that there was a mismatch between the description of the parameter and what was actually being registered. So we said that it could be used at session level or media level, but the IANA registration only registered it for media level. I think this was a mistake that I made when one of the drafts, so I removed it unintentionally the session level 1. And what I have done in the new draft is to just put back again that it can be used for session level and media level. But as it is a change to the draft, I wanted to raise it here to see if this is still the consensus of the group, or if anyone has any concern about how it did at both session level or media level. So next slide, please. Also, there was 2 questions about IPRs. Then I don't think that we need to do anything. Bernard already answered those issues in both the mailing list and in the issues. And I'm not sure if we need to do anything else regarding this to fix or to cover the feedback, or if we need to do anything else regarding this.
Well, we covered it in the last meeting and also on the mailing list. So I think the only issue was that at the time I did the write-up, we didn't have the disclosure. So that's why the confusion was created.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Bernard. So next one, please. So this one is there was one that recommended that this should be formally update the RFC 3711, because also this is a mechanism that updates or is a alternative approach of Heather and Christian as the one that is explained in RFC 6904. So as 6904 updates RFC 3711, this draft should also update it. So this is what I have done in the latest draft. So first is that to check that if everyone is okay with this change. And the second thing is that when I have included this in the draft, I have 2 warnings when updated to when submitting the draft, and I'm not sure if the first one should be ignored or not, or if anyone can get me some guidance regarding that.
Yeah, the first one can be ignored. The second one, I think, should probably be done. Yeah. And Stefan, did you have a comment?
Stefan Winger, this is just with respect to this IPR slide. There were some languages offends me a little bit, and I want to put on the record that I don't believe the IETF has something like a requirement for an IPR disclosure to be compatible with something the IETF has. Yeah. There are certain formal requirements how to make a disclosure, and when to make a disclosure, but what is in there is none of our business here. Yeah, certainly there's no such thing as incompatible with the IETF IPR disclosure. Thank you.
Right. So yeah, I think on this slide, I think, yeah, your 2 resolutions are correct. Ignore the disclaimer. That's just making sure you didn't import any text from 3711, which you didn't.
Yep.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so next slide, please. This one is a bit more, there was some feedback about if we should first deprecate RFC 6904, and then is if we should, if both are negotiated, if we should mandate or we should recommend that cryptex should be used instead of RFC 6904, because currently it is up to the implementation. So
yeah, in this one, Sergio, I don't know if it makes sense, because when you offer both cryptex and 6904, it means I can receive either one, right? Which you might do because you don't know what the other side will actually support, right? Presumably the answer should only pick one of them.
Yeah,
so
I think
I think this question is a bit confused.
Yeah, I think that it is about if if one receiver support both, if we should say that the sender should use cryptex instead of RFC 6904.
Well, it's up to the sender, right? The sender can pick one. The sender, remember, the other side, the answer is also saying what it can receive. Right? It's not choosing from among the things that are in the offer. It's saying what I can receive. So it might also say I can receive both.
Mhm.
It's up to the sender then to decide what to send. Does that
But do we
make
want to
sense?
give any guidance on towards that?
Yeah, you could give guidance on that. It's not, on
Yeah.
what you should send if you have the option of both. Yeah.
Magnus, did you have a?
Magnus Westland. Yeah, I think it would be wrong to deprecate the normal way of doing the per header extensions. I know there are other usages out there, or at least proposed usages. Well, it's not compatible with crypttex. So
Basically, there are things where you do need in the clear header
Yeah,
extension. Well, I mean,
yeah.
I guess wouldn't be to deprecate the header extensions, unencrypted header extensions at all. It's do you want to deprecate the old header extension encryption mechanism?
yeah, but no. So I know that 3DPP has some proposals where they want to have header extensions in the clear. I think there might also be header extensions that needs to be encrypted. So therefore, the old mechanism is going to be needed, which is so. So therefore, and I think it's as if I understood Bernard correct here, is like, yeah, let the application declare and select what express their preference according to normal STP rules, etc., or other singular mechanisms. So
Yeah, I mean, my inclination would be to say, if you support both, you should do crypttex unless you have a need to send both, unless you actually have an application need to send both encrypted and in the clear headers in the same packets. Would that be reasonable? If you support both.
I mean, if you intend to encrypt everything, yeah, I guess would be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I'd suggest, if you follow that, Sergio, I'd suggest, do a PR and post to the list and ask.
Mhm.
Magnus, are you getting back in the queue, or are you just, or should I remove you? All right. Okay. All right.
Okay,
That's some good, Sergio?
yes, so we said no, that we should not deprecate the RCC 6904, and we put a PR for with the should, if the sender support both, that it should send crypttext instead, even if it doesn't require to specifically send some header extension encrypted and some others not encrypted.
That would be my inclination, but, if anybody else has any comments. Mo?
I agree that you should not deprecate 6904. That would make sense. But if you're negotiating crypttex and you do see, and you also support 1604, I think the whole point of supporting crypttex is you want more security and you want, less revealed. So I don't understand why you would say should and not must here. If you say should, what is the exception of when you may not?
Again, I think if you actually have an application need to have some header extensions in the clear and some encrypted.
But why would you negotiate crypttex then?
Maybe not. Maybe you wouldn't, yeah.
No, yeah.
You're not actually negotiating it, Mo. You're just saying, I am capable of receiving it. Right? It's a separate choice from what you send.
So you think that there's a security requirement asymmetrically that I'm very security conscious about what I receive, but I'm not very security conscious about what I send?
Stranger things have happened.
No, I mean, I'm just saying the decisions are separate. I think what we're talking about here is what you send if the other side says it can receive both.
Well, I thought that the resolution was going to be to say, if you support both, then you should use crypttex. And usually when you put a should, you specify when you would not. What's the exception? Why is it not a must? When would you not do this? And I'm having a hard time envisioning what useful text you would say of when you would not do this.
Yeah, I suggest we discuss this on the list once we have text, once we have a PR.
Okay.
Yeah, because I don't want to take too much time on this.
Okay. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Yeah.
So this one is currently we say that if we say that we support crypttex and And the application considering that it is mandatory, but we receive an RTP that has not a crystal headers that we should process in the RTP packet. And the question was, is not a must stop? So,
I mean, I would agree, given that there's the if you consider it mandatory, which is obviously
yeah,
an implementation decision. I think must is fine for that conditional case, personally. That's sort of the definition of mandatory.
yeah. Yeah. So I agree. So either we should change the mandatory, or we should put a must there.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. So this is what is the next step. So I will just make the PR that it is missing and publish it to the mailing list for confirmation. And when that is done, I will publish a new crypttext draft. And I'm not sure what do we need to do next. If we should have a last call again, or again ISG review.
I think. Well, I'm trying to. What exactly is the procedure? If I think it just goes to the IESG, and the IESG members decide whether it satisfies their discussion comments. So I think that's all we need to.
I don't think these changes are big enough to require another working group last call.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So,
all right.
All from my side. So thank you, Ben.
Hold on, Magnus, did you have a
clarification for notes? Just
yeah?
Did you say that we go to must or just
that so on this one, I think we said we'd go to must in, I think that Sergio said either go to must or change the word mandatory. I'd be inclined to say go to must, because I think that's the easiest, easiest thing to, say. But anybody else have any comments? All right. Okay, I think that's it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Sergio.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And Stefan's up next.
Yeah, I think I will do this from here. Stefan Wenger, VVC payload format. Next slide. Thank you. So version 16 was out in the ISG. They came up with 3 discusses and a whole bunch of useful comments, including a real stupid bug from our side. We populated the YANA template only halfway, and copy-paste errors, stupid stuff. Anyway, these 3 discusses, 2 were cleared after we published version 17. In 17, we tried to address everything. Some discuss remained, and that is related to a technology that was introduced in RFC 3984 back 20 years ago or so, regarding sender properties, which is something that somewhat changes the, in an offer answer scenario, somewhat changes the semantics of how you use SDP, basically. That history was probably not in Saad's mind when he came up with this discuss. So we had a meeting this morning, and the outcome of that meeting is that we'll add informative language explaining this unusual behavior of SPROP code points, and issue a version 18, and he plans to clear his discuss against that version 18 if things are looking good. And then our suggestion, our author's suggestion is the updated YANA template, which was the only significant normative change, actually the only normative change, if I recall, that was signed up by the YANA review, signed off, and the area directors generally responded, thanks for addressing our comments, So I think and this change here will be purely informative, so I think we don't need another last call here in the working group. And what the IETF is doing is up to what the ISG is doing is up to the ISG, obviously. Thank you very much.
I personally concur. I think that should be fine. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Stefan. Any comments on any of that, or shall we move on? All right, next is Skip. I think, Dan, are you presenting?
Or is it Mike?
Oh, Mike is presenting.
I'll start this show off a little.
Okay, sure.
This is Mike Fowler, and good afternoon to the Avtcore community. Next slide, please. Our status is awaiting external review resolution of issues raised. We an email is referenced here from the music working group that indicates their review of the SDP is complete. And I guess the important message is it does not define any new SDP attributes. There is no need for any new SDP procedures. GenArt's review had a simple summary of the simple document is adequate to register the media type as is. ArtArt had some questions on it and basically said not ready, and we'll go over the comments from the community in the next slides. Our draft is due to expire on November 26th, and Dan will pick up this. We put this together. Thank you.
Okay. I guess one of the main issues that was actually raised in both comments for GenArt and ArtArt was regarding the references to skip 210 and references to skip 214. Both of these groups wanted them to be normative. However, I believe that this group actually determined way back when that these would be informational documents. As far as we go, as far as our opinion, it doesn't really matter to us. I guess it's just a matter of coming to a resolution on this as far as which type of reference this should be. Bernard?
Yeah, as you've said, I think many times, this document is not the documentation of skip. So it's merely the documentation of essentially the SDP. So I don't think it's, the comment says you need it to implement skip, but I don't think that's necessarily relevant, which is why we allowed it to be informational. So there may be a little bit of misunderstanding there on the part of the reviewer as to what the document is actually doing.
Okay. All right, then we'll keep it as informational reference at this point. Okay. Next slide. Let's see. Yeah, the ArtArt group mentioned that 214 is only mentioned at one point in the document. We've discussed possibly even removing the reference to 214.2 from this document, only because it's internally, the skip 214 is really a precursor to this upcoming RFC, if you will. So it's kind of can go away, if you will. I guess the only issue I saw with that is that it is actually referenced in the IANA registration. So I guess as part of that update, and it kind of leads into another question later on about the IANA registration, about how that would affect if we do decide to remove the skip 214 reference from our document. Bernard?
Yeah, I think you could remove it and then update the registration. Since it seems like all the comments refer to the references, having as few as possible might just save you some hassle.
Yeah.
You know, the real question is, you know, do you need this reference? Is it, you know, really necessary to understand the document? And as you've said, for 214, I think the answer is no.
Right, like I said, it was kind of internally for our working group, the skip working group. It was really a precursor to this reference, and its content is essentially what this RFC is. So it can kind of go away, if you will, from this IETF document. So
the other way to think of it, though, is also the fact that while the information presented in 214.2 and this draft RFC are nearly identical, the communities that will actually use them are different, and their references are more relevant. You know, the RFC is meant for people outside of our skip community who are building products that have to carry our payloads. And that's what they need to build to. The skip is reference is for ECUs and units that will be implementing the full scope of a bunch of other skip documents. And this would be the only place that provides a tie-in for those functions. So remove it if it gets this along, that's great. Otherwise, it is the tie-in to the community, the skip community, and the networking community.
I mean, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, sorry, Bernard.
Yeah, I guess my only question would be, just it's a maintenance question. Are you going to, what if you decide to do an update for video or something? Are you going to do it in the skip 214 series, like have a .3? Are you going to update this document? That might be the only reason it's relevant, is if you're trying to point someone to it. But if this document really kind of supersedes and obsoletes 214.2 and there's no plan to have a .3 or .4 or something, then it seems like the reference is gratuitous.
Yeah, I can see it both ways. That's the only way I bring it up, but because the RFC won't obsolete the document to our community. But
yeah, I think the only alternative I would have is just to, I mean, if you do want to keep it in, just mention it somewhere outside the abstract. Just mention it in the introduction or something, saying, hey, this used to be defined by 214.2, but this supersedes that, or something like that. So just so it's more clear to people what the document is. Just as it says, so it's mentioned somewhere besides the abstract and the registration. Just informationally, if you want to do that. Otherwise, as I said, taking it out would be fine.
Yeah, if you're in agreement, I think we'll probably just remove it.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Next slide. And back to the registration here. I guess the question was the sections 5.1 and 5.2 of this document are basically if you will, the IANA registration. We did do that earlier before we submitted this draft skip drafts, and we did register the payload types first. I think the question was as far as updating the IANA registration for this was or having it also repeated, if you will, in our document, in this document. I guess it was one of the questions was about how to update contact information and things like that about that. I don't know if we could throw that question out there to talk about first here, I guess, what the process is, if there is a process for updating contact, if that's.
Yeah, I think that if the goal of this document is to change these registrations to refer to this document rather than 214.2. So I think if you explicitly say on both the bullets on this slide, this, updates this registration to be this document rather than the previous registration, I think that it should be fine. Then you're not repeating the registration, you're changing the registration, and that's fine.
Right, and I guess that would, because there's actually, as per reference, it points to 214.2 in that IANA registration. So that section would have to be updated. Sorry, would have to be updated to remove those references as well. So
yeah,
just
again,
not a big deal. So
yeah.
So
yeah, I think that should be fine. Just as long as it's clear that this is not repeating something that already exists. It's doing something new. It should be fine.
Right. And I guess as the comment for the section 7 and the second bullet there about adding instructions to IANA to point to this document when it becomes an RFC rather than those things. I guess it's just a sentence or two or whatever. If there's a specific language I need to use or whatever for them to recognize that so.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I guess that's that. Next slide. Yes. So I don't know, Mike, I don't know if you want to wrap this up here. I guess this is.
Yeah. There were some comments received that were more narrative, and they were not incorporated as they they don't impact the technical information necessary to port skip. They were references to the intro, the abstract, and background information, where references were occurring, and it was I guess not to be quite blunt, but someone's opinion that doesn't really impact what we really want people to concentrate on, which is the technical information. So I didn't want to start moving stuff around for the sake of one person's opinion, and that doesn't really, is just a story, and anyone can tell the story in different ways. So we left it. It just seemed like an easier way to go. And the comments which impact the technical understanding that were discussed here with the resolution, we'll put that into the draft RFC. We would look for, Dan was asking for information of how to approach IANA about updating what is presently there to reflect, well, for instance, an RFC number when we get it here, but that we didn't know what the specific procedures, who to contact and how to do that. So we may be looking for guidance there. And after that, we can update this document, and we can update IANA in parallel once we have something of an RFC number to tell them to put into place. But what are the next steps? What's next after this?
Bernard, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically the main thing here is to update the IANA in registration section to do the things we talked about. In terms of next steps beyond this, it would be the Shepherd write-up. The issue we're having, I think, right now is, I think it's stabilizing. They changed a bunch of the questions and the shepherding procedure. But as soon as, but that would be the next step beyond this once you've submitted a new draft. I guess the sector review is still outstanding, but hopefully that'll show up at some point. But I don't think we have to wait for that to show up.
Right, yeah, because I wasn't quite clear about exactly from the art review exactly what specific things that they said that were a problem that would prevent this from moving forward. I mean, there was a comment about some of the initial language up front, the boilerplate documents for the 2119 reference, and we changed that, but I guess we weren't clear about exactly which particular issues that were raised that were showstoppers for that group. So
yeah, it would be I think the ones you do have to fix are the IANA issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the references which we just talked about. So I think we've pretty much gone over everything that would be, would be an impediment to moving forward.
Okay. All right. We'll get that updated review probably next week, I guess. We'll see if we can get version 2 out.
Great.
All right.
Okay.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much. Bernard?
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll try to make this quick. This is an update on 7983 BIS. Next slide. So I think you've all heard what this is basically about. It's an attempt to multiplex quick with SRTP, SRTCP, stun, turn, DTLS, and ZRTP. And it does include an update to DTLS content type field with no other change. Next slide. So the working group last call completed on June 6th. We got 3 major comments. One was from Martin, who was concerned that some of the text had quick version dependencies. For example, we explicitly mentioned the quick short and long headers, which could conceivably change in some future version. David pointed out that our language about the quick greasing was somewhat vague and suggested a much more specific language. Don't send the transport parameter. Another question he raised was relating to demultiplexing of churn channels and quick. And Jonathan also chimed in on that, and I'll talk a little bit about the resolution, but it's basically along the lines Jonathan suggested, which is that the overlap between turn channels and quick isn't actually a big problem because the turn channel packet should only come from a turn server. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more. Next slide. So this is the updated diagram. It's basically the same as what we had before, but we took out references to the quick, short, and long headers. Basically, we just say forward it to quick, and then whatever quick version you happen to have, we'll figure out what those packets mean, assuming it's being forwarded correctly. So we don't really have to put in version-specific things here, and so that's the change in the diagram. Next. So in terms of changes, we had major changes were in section 1 and section 2. And in section 1, we basically said, hey, we are compatible with Quick version 2 in its draft form, but not with the Quick bit greasing. And as a result, you must not send that transport parameter. And then in section 2, this is where we talk about the overlap between turn channels and Quick and how to deal with it. So this kind of is important text. And basically what we're saying here is along the lines of what Jonathan suggested, which is that the overlap isn't a real problem because you would only get the turn channel packets from a turn server. And what that means is you basically, as Jonathan said in his message, you only really need to be able to disambiguate the turn from, disambiguate stun. And then the other one is disambiguating SRTP, SRTCP, ZRP, DTLS, or Quick, which won't be sent from a source and IP and port that had responded to a turn allocation. So it is a little bit different from the previous demultiplexing advice in 7983, and that you do need to keep track of the turn server IP addresses and ports to be able to do the demultiplexing. But I think if you do that, it is the overlap is not an issue. And you can unambiguously demultiplex.
Yep. That's a very good summary of what I suggested. So great. Thank you.
Okay. So the question here is, have we addressed everything, in particular this overlap between turn and Quick? And if not, is there anything else we need to address to kind of address all of the working group last call issues that were brought up?
Personally, I think we're probably ready. And I guess since you're the author, I can take over shepherding it. But, anybody object? Otherwise, we'll go ahead. Great. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you.
Okay. RTP over quick. Who's doing this? Not this? Yeah. No, turn that on.
Better?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have a short update on RTP over quick. I will first go through the updates we did between the last interim meeting and the call for adoption, and then later look at some of the open issues and proposed solutions. Next slide, please.
There we are.
So we added a scope section in the beginning of the draft, which explains that this draft is aiming to describe a minimal mapping for application usage of RTP over quick. We try to do the minimal stuff first, and then we can go to more complex scenarios later. The baseline here expects that we have a standard quick implementation, but it can benefit from quick extensions. We describe some of the optimizations we can do to RTP over quick when we have some of these quick extensions, and we describe what the API of a quick implementation could offer to implement these optimizations. We are limiting this to RTP over quick without doing any changes to quick or RTP. and the signaling is to be done in a separate way. Example could be SDP for RTP over QUIC, which we'll look at later. Next slide. Then there was a discussion on the mailing list that we need an ALPN. We have added a section for this in the, I think, in the beginning of the draft, that an ALPN is required by QUIC to set up a connection, and we defined R2P MUX QUIC to indicate that this that it is be possible to multiplex different flows next to RTP on the same QUIC connection. We will go back to that later in an issue I will talk about later in a slide. And we added, similar to other drafts, defining ALPN's subsection, which is to be removed later, to add a suffix to the ALPN as long as this is in draft state, so that one can identify the draft, which is identified by this ALPN, the draft version. Next slide, please. We added a section on API considerations, which basically lists a set of features which QUIC implementations can provide to help implementing certain optimizations. The section is split into two subsections. One is listing informations that the QUIC implementation or the QUIC stack could expose to the application layer to help implementing the optimizations in RTP. That includes, for example, the MDU size to send datagrams of the correct size, acknowledgements as they are listed in the RTCP section, which we talked about already earlier. Things like stream states, so we added streams in the last meeting, or I talked about that, I think, and if we are using streams, then we need to know something like how far is the stream progressed, so is the RTP packet completely sent, or is it not, so that the RTP implementation or the application implementation can make a decision whether it wants to keep the stream open to allow for retransmissions or whether it wants to cancel the stream because it's too late to transmit the packets. And then the second subsection of the API considerations lists some methods that could be exposed by a QUIC implementation, such as canceling streams if we want to, or for example, setting congestion controllers. Next slide, please. Then we have a few more other options, which are little changes in the sections which are already there. We restrict RTP sessions for now to use either QUIC streams or QUIC datagrams, not both at the same time. Different RTP sessions can use QUIC streams and datagrams, so just not within one session. And then we add some implications about the mapping from QUIC statistics to RTCP when QUIC streams are used. I think I already mentioned this in the last meeting, that in this case, the connections are not exactly what is in the network, because due to retransmissions, we have other statistics than we would have if we would use RTCP. And we added an implication to, or a note to the draft that an application should be aware of this. It might be what the application wants to know, but it needs to keep in mind that this is not exactly what RTCP would give. Then we added a little subsection about congestion control considerations when a QUIC connection is shared between RTP sessions and other data streams. Yeah,
Mo?
Melza, just a question about the first point. What's the point of the restriction on not being able to use streams and datagrams simultaneously?
For now, for us, it was just because we wanted to do the simple thing first. We are not exactly sure what the implications are. If one session is using both, we might loosen this restriction later, I would say, but we were just not clear about what the implications are of this.
Okay, so just FYI, in some other usages of media over QUIC, like in Mach and Quicker, we are actively sending both streams and datagrams, and we see a lot of use cases where that actually has some benefits.
Yeah, thanks. I see there's someone else in the queue, but I can't read the name from here.
No, I think that's just, I didn't, oh, Bernard.
Yeah, so I did want to follow up on what Mo was talking about. You know, particularly when you're bundling things together, right? There might be you might have a bunch of things on the same quick connection. You might be sending data, and that actually led me to a question about the ALPN. You know, you're suggesting RTP mux, but you might also be sending data on that connection. Presumably, if you're sending data, you still would want the same congestion control. For example, if you're doing audio and video and you're sending data, that data, you know, might well use the same low latency algorithm, right? You don't necessarily care that, and the algorithm would take care of multiplexing those two things. So anyway, I think the main thing is it would be good to actually have some goals in there to address some of the questions that Mo had, so that we're clear about what the scope of what we're trying to do is, and why we're imposing some of these restrictions so that we can understand whether we want them or not.
Mo?
Mo's around again. Just to clarify, the use cases that I had in mind were sending audio as datagrams and video as streams, or a complex video stream, layered video stream, the dependent layers as streams, and the independent layers as streams, and the dependent layers as datagrams. Those are the specific examples that I was at.
Yeah, Mo, and I've seen similar usage where the base layer is sent as reliable, and the upper layers are sent as datagrams.
Jörg?
Yeah, you're good. Just quickly on this, we have that on our radar, as much as said. It's since there is different ways of how you could prioritize one thing over the other. The quick datagram graph currently says that if there's a datagram coming, you send that first. There's a bunch of implications to be understood, and this is what we currently have on our agenda of trying to figure out. So there is not a disagreement with this idea, but it's not completely obvious what kind of feature interactions when using both at the same time for different things there would be. That's all.
Yeah, and in fact, we've seen some of these algorithms implemented and they didn't have the effect that was intended. For example, saying you send the datagrams right away doesn't necessarily, as I think you pointed out, mean you get low delay.
So it sounds like there's interest in that, but perhaps, needs more investigation.
Okay, then we added considerations on connection migration and zero RTT in our discussion section, and some minimal security considerations. Next slide, please. There are currently 4 open issues in the GitHub repository. So one thing which we have not as a GitHub repository first, in the GitHub repository first, translators forwarding UDP packets from RTP packets over UDP received via RTP over QUIC are bound to the MTU of the UDP packets. And in our current draft, it says that we can use streams for RTP packets, where one RTP packet is sent on one stream, and that could potentially be larger than the MTU in the UDP, which it's being forwarded to. So that is one problem that we might have to solve. Then 2 issues for which we already have pull requests in the GitHub repository. The first one is retransmission flow IDs. There was a question that on which flow ID a RTP packet has to be retransmitted, and I would say that is up to which RTP stream that RTP packet is retransmitted in, and then the flow ID will be that of this RTP session. Then there was a question about which stream times we're using, and we added a pull request which says that we are actually only using unidirectional because we intend to close the stream as soon as the RTP packet is transmitted, and in that case we don't have any data flowing in the other direction because we cancel the stream after or close the stream afterwards anyway, so we're using unidirectional streams. Stefan?
This is regarding the first bullet there, translator forwarding packets over UDP. My suggestion, without really fully understanding what you're doing there, my suggestion is to not over-engineer, right? Sender stupidity is something you can't design against, yeah? If if a sender, if you are in a scenario, and which you will be probably in the next 10 or 20 years, where there may be a gateway involved that speaks UDP on the other side, and the sender is stupid enough to create packets that are megabyte long, well, tough, right? Business will take care of that.
Okay, thanks.
This is Spencer Dawkins. We talked with Memphis a little bit about this earlier today, I think, and one of the things I was suggesting was that there's lots of different kinds of RTP translators and middle boxes, like there's an RFC full of them. And for us to be real, in addition to what Stefan was saying, it's good to be real clear on what kind of middle box we're talking about here, because there's lots of them, and there's probably one or two that we might have in mind for use with RTP over QUIC.
Yeah, I think we'll look into this.
Bernard?
There's a bunch of things here that this group is doing or may do that may have impact on RTP topologies. So it may be worth thinking about how to get that information somewhere. I'm thinking in particular about end-to-end encryption. There may be situations where, you know, a main wouldn't be able to adjust the MTU size or anything like that. And I think this is just one of them. So just something to think about.
Okay, thanks. Okay, then the last two issues are two issues to which we don't have solutions yet. The first one is considerations about stream concurrency, because in QUIC, the sender needs credits to open streams, and the receiver has to provide enough credits for that. And Lucas Pardue opened this issue and suggested that we should add some considerations about that, because it limits the amount of parallel RTP packets which are currently being transmitted. And we should probably give some guidance on this, how a receiver has to manage this. And then the last one is also from Lucas Pardue, is what happens if datagrams are not enabled. And he suggested that we could encode something for this case in the ALPN tokens, or create multiple ALPN tokens, for example, to let senders and receivers negotiate in the connection establishment what kind of transmission they are going to use, streams or datagrams, or use transport parameters for that. And but then we also have the external signaling for setting or negotiating the sessions, probably in SDP, for example. And what would happen if I, for example, negotiate something in SDP and then the connection setup does something else? So that's an issue we are having in the GitHub repositories currently, and we don't exactly know how to resolve this yet. Yeah, I think these are the current issues. If there's input from the working group, that would be probably quite helpful. And then next slide. So as the next steps or recent steps, we submitted a working group draft this week, and then we're going to continue with it, working with Spencer on the SDP signaling. Yeah, I think that's all I have for now. And
just a comment, in the web transport working group, we also talked about whether datagrams should be required, and it was pointed out that this is very easy to implement in QUIC. So there's no real excuse for not doing it in a QUIC implementation. So the thinking was just require it, you know, in the transport parameter and just get it up, you know, get it over with there. Whether you use it or not in SDP is a different story, but at the QUIC layer, just require that they do datagrams.
Okay.
All right. I think anything else on this, or else, Spencer? Thank you.
So I'm Spencer Dawkins, and I'm the follow-on to Mathis and York. Next slide, please. So basically, remembering that my goal with an individual draft was to do a minimal SDP specification, which roughly tracks the draft that has now been adopted by the Avtcore working group, and to track more high-level issues in a separate repo that I think a lot of the discussion will not end up in the minimal SDP specification. So at this IETF, I'm providing an update based on I was actually looking at -4 of the individual draft, but I think the only change was the name to reflect adoption. And please feel free to provide feedback on the mailing list also. And my goal is to issue a -01 of the minimal specification before our next Avtcore meeting. Eventually, I think it would be good for me to request adoption of the minimal specification. But I'm not doing that at this time. Next slide, please. So what AVP profiles to register was issue number 5. Proposal at the last interim was to register one profile, quick RTP AVTPF, and noting that the secure AVP profiles are most useful when bridging to non-quick RTP, and we were saying that we would have that conversation. We'll revise the RTP topologies RFC. And of course, I forgot to prepend UDP for consistency in the registry. My apologies. And then other related questions started popping up. What about datagrams, streams versus datagrams on the next slide? And will we need TCP, which is a new issue. Next slide, please. So, like I said, the RTP over streams datagrams are both shows up in a couple of places. Issue number 8 and issue number 9, number 3. Right now, there's discussion of including a shared capability as well in the draft we've adopted, although I'm getting slightly ahead of where the adopted draft is. So my proposal would be to do stream, datagram, and shared if we get to shared, just based on the discussion we're having about that draft. Next slide, please. This is new. Do we need TCP ICE? This is from Roman. And this is my summary of his longer explanations that are on the list. I would recommend taking a look at those. His key point, as I understand it, is that we need a way to fall back to TCP. If we can use ICE TCP candidates, we do have a fallback, and if we can't, what's the alternative? His proposal was to also register TCP quick, RTP, AVPF style profiles. And there's actually a continuing discussion since I sent the slides in on the mailing list about, well, why would we not just go to RTP over TCP? Like I say, more working group discussion.
Yeah, you're good. Just to point out that probably requires some fundamental explanation on the list, because I haven't yet fully understood how this chain of reasoning came into being that would need to be registered. If we are worried about running 2 congestion controls, one in Scream or something on top of Quick, you should be even more worried about running 3 congestion controllers on top of each other if we tunnel the whole thing then to TCP. That just doesn't sound about what we would want to be doing.
Yeah, Roman, I'll let you respond first, then I guess I'll put myself in the queue for as an individual.
Yeah. So the basic problem is that if they're using like ICE machinery or setting up calls, they come with certain kind of features, which again haven't been designed for RTP over QUIC. They've been designed for RTP over UDP, and they come with support for tunneling over TCP or TLS. Like for instance, if you use turn servers, you are relaying through a intermediary server, and one of the relays can be over TCP to a turn server, and from turn server over UDP to whatever is using whatever is the party on the other end. So it's kind of part of ICE machinery. The other situation is the other kind of extension is ICE TCP, which is where you try to establish a TCP connection between the like 2 ICE or agents, and you tunnel the protocol over this TCP connection. And I guess the main complicating factor that people kind of miss in all of this is that the way ICE operate is that you can end up, for instance, with your packets going over a TCP connection, and in the process of nomination, your same protocol which is running on top can switch to UDP. Like the typical example would be it takes some time to set up a turn relay, which would be over UDP. So, and your ICE TCP candidates will work first. So like you start negotiating connection over ICE TCP, and then you switch to relay through a turn server, while the protocol is still being set up while you're basically sending initial packets for media. So it's kind of all designed to work together, and not necessarily ideal for what we're doing with RTP over QUIC. But if we want to use the ICE machinery, we kind of like stuck with it, or we need to redesign it to work differently. But again, that's a fairly heavy uplift. So that's kind of where this whole TCP tunneling comes from, and the candidate actually comes from, like, again, some of the quirks of SDP ICE negotiation, and that's why I had to add those like TCP versions of protocols for DTLS SRTP and like for the MRCP. It's just because of the, like, in a certain sequence of events, you need to signal that you are sending stuff over a TCP tunnel, and that's the only way to specify it. It doesn't typically affect the overall protocol, but it's again not ideal because there are multiple layers of backend congestion. There are multiple issues with head of the line congestion when you're tunneling over TCP, which are again undesirable, but it's kind of been treated as a treated as yeah. So anyway, so it's just if we're using ICE, like, we need it. If we're not using ICE, we need to come up with alternative for going through essentially negotiating connection from behind NAT or behind partially restricted.
Yeah. I should just make the observation that Roman, I, and York are the 3 people that are talking on the mailing list right now, but the discussion is happening in a email thread with a not particularly obvious subject. I would suggest that we plan to do more discussion on the mailing list between now and our next meeting, and that the next person to reply change the subject.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox is an individual. I was going to say, I mean, part of the problem is that ICE stacks generally, the obvious implementation is to abstractly provide a datagram API, and then the ICE stack figures out how you get end to end. So your suggestion of doing RTP over TLS, well, abstractly that would be a cleaner thing than QUIC over TCP. Would mean you have to feed entirely different things down into your stack depending on what the ICE negotiated, which would be very much a layer violation in terms of having to know what your ICE stack is doing.
Thank you. Bernard?
My comment was that I think we may not be thinking about this at a high enough level. Basically, within Quick, we always have to think about failover, right? And often that's done at the app layer. So as an example, in web transport, we fail over from HTTP 3 to HTTP 2. And that does have a whole other series of issues with it, because obviously you can't emulate Quick. But I wouldn't, as Horst said, running multiple layers of congestion control, RTP congestion control over Quick congestion control over TCP, that's just going to be a disaster. I wouldn't even want to imagine to analyze that. Like BBRV2 over New Reno, Scream over BBRV2 over New Reno. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that the way we have to do the selection is ICE, and I don't think we want a new selection mechanism in this space.
Bernard, I would make the observation that I was thinking about this roughly as a quick failover thing like you were talking about, but that was mostly because I don't understand ICE well enough to go lower.
Mm-hmm.
York?
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest that we really try to write this down as emails, because I get a Stack Overflow when I'm trying to follow that that explanation. I also want to remark that back in the days when my dim memory tries to remember what we had been doing when I was sharing MMusic at the time, you could tell ICE what you wanted to negotiate, right? So if we have an API abstraction problem, that's a different thing from being a protocol and signaling problem. And we shouldn't be getting the latter in the way of getting the former, this other thing right.
Thank you.
Roman? After that, I'm going to close this.
Yeah, so again, just to reiterate, again, ICE, as far as I know, with its current implementations, cannot include like a non-uniform protocols. You cannot negotiate between RTP over TLS and, like, let's say, Quick over TP using ICE. Partially because you are sending media and you're sending data from a higher level protocol during a nomination. So the candidates are changing, and your protocol, like underlying transport protocol, is changing while you are sending media. So it essentially means like figuring out the transition from RTP over Quick to RTP over TLS. And or it's actually like switching between Quick handshake and RTP over TLS handshake in the middle of the handshake. And this is just like not something that is possible to do. It's like it's designed to send the same kind of sending the same higher level protocol.
I look forward to continued discussions on the mailing list. Thank you, Roman, and thank you for raising the issue. Next slide. So we were having a conversation about what to do with quick congestion control and whether we need to be able to explicitly ask an implementation to do things. And where we were at the last interim meeting, I guess, was that I was proposing we explore whether RTP running over Quick was a problem in practice at the congestion control issues. Now that we're recommending, now that the draft we adopted is registering an ALPN, the Quick implementation of the other end will know this is something like RTP. So the proposal is that the SDP should carry ALPNs because that allows the use of multiple draft versions and experiments and things like that. Next slide. Oh, sorry, Bernard, please jump right in.
Yeah, my concern would be you're now creating additional complexity. For example, in WebRTC, we don't negotiate ALPNs within DTLS, right? So I would question why you need to do that at multiple places, because You'll then, oh, I negotiated this ALPM, but I got another one. You just have to check both of them. So it just creates additional failure modes. So just something to think about whether in fact this avoids failures or it adds to the brittleness.
Bernard, I was thinking of this, maybe not quite right, but the way that quick variants were being advertised in ALPN before version 1 was finalized. Am I not getting that right?
They just did something. Did they just make the slides go away? I'm sorry. Let's do something up here.
Yeah, it had version. There's also version negotiation, which is different. Yeah, it's a complicated subject. It did create a lot of brittleness because people would only advertise the last 2 versions, and then sometimes if you got versions ahead, you just wouldn't be able to connect.
Right. So I think what you're talking about may be that I am getting a little bit ahead of where we need to be with this in the SDP discussions. Yeah, thank you. Like I say, we'll talk some more on the mailing list. Any more slides?
Okay, you have this one.
Oh yeah, how to ask for quick feedback is new. We want to allow implementations to ask quick for feedback. This is in the draft. Mo?
Yeah, Mosin, sorry, I was
previous slide?
Referencing the previous slide
Okay,
about
sure.
ALPNs. I don't, I understand where the ALPN purists are coming from, that, okay, I just operate generic web servers and I have no idea. People connecting to them blindly are going to get, you know, H3 or H2 or something else, or not even a HTTP service, but something else. I understand that aspect, but I think this is very different because you're talking about a signaling exchange before where, you know, the parties know what the service is. It's not a blind client going to a port number. So I don't think registering a bunch of ALPNs to describe very complex STPs is useful. If you mux 20 different things, I don't think it's worth all the permutations of ALPNs being registered to say that, okay, I may mux these 20 different things. The STP is being explicit about what is being connected to.
Yeah.
So I don't think the LPN really provides any benefit whatsoever there. Yeah.
So Nick, 2 observations there. One is that what I'm talking about is if there are 2 different versions of the RTP over quick specification that you support, that you would have 2 different ALPNs for those, but that you're not, you know, that you're not registering a bunch of ALPNs depending on what the SDP says.
But wouldn't you think that if you have different RTP over quick versions, that you also have different SDP for those RTP over quick versions? It seems unimaginable to me that ALPN is really the way to disambiguate all this stuff. There's going to be a boatload of SDP way before you hit the ALPN.
I believe you. Thank you. Back to the next slide. So basically, now that we want to allow optionally in the current draft, substituting transport layer feedback for RTCP feedback for some aspects of feedback, and like I say, recognizing that we are trying to reduce overhead where possible, and that mapping may require some creativity. One of the proposals that's in the draft that the working group has adopted is that Quick does not have NAC, but it can interpret, you know, it can detect lost packets. So if it bounces that back up as a NAC, an RTP implementation could know what to do with it. My question here is, in order to do this, are we talking about enabling transport layer feedback as a clump, or are we naming individual pieces of transport feedback, layer feedback that you want to get? My proposal was to request this as a clump, But again, this is the first time I'm talking about this with the working group, so this almost certainly needs more working group discussion, unless everybody wants to just agree with me. Bernard?
Yeah, I think we're going to need to discuss this in more detail because along with, I think, the quick requirements for the transport, because you're going to be negotiating, just as transport parameters, a whole bunch of quick extensions and things like that, which may impact your ability to do things. And then on top of that, you have what I think of as the RTP negotiation, where you're saying what RTCP mechanisms you're using. So I'd be a little bit concerned about the interaction between all that stuff. And so I think we, as an example, we should be real clear about what we might not be doing. Like we might be using quick acts, but that might require timing extensions. And then if we have a whole bunch of stuff, we might be able to not negotiate max, just as a weird example. So I think we need to dig into the transport requirements and understand fully what we need to get rid of various things.
I would thank you, Bernard. I would agree, and I would observe that a lot of the discussion that we've had has been assuming that datagram was an option before datagram was. I think we started talking about this before datagram was a working group draft in Quick. Now that it's an RFC and Quick is starting to do other extensions that might be relevant to us, that's probably a good thing for us to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess my question is, do we want to try to, Mo, I guess you're first.
Mo Zanatti, well, on the previous topic for feedback, one thing to note from this morning's Quick session, this proposal for Quick timestamps to be adopted. I think it's very relevant for RTP or media in general. So I think if people here want to support things like the RTCP feedback formats that do have timestamps and they'd like to carry those over to Quick, I think you should chime in on the Quick list to say that you support that timestamp extension being added to Quick.
Right. Christian Whitma, who is the author in Quick, was asking if the working group was ready to adopt the timestamps draft, and the working group was kind of, sort of, maybe, if I'm characterizing them correctly, and but that I did say, Avtcore is interested in this for some of the media, real-time media congestion control mechanisms that use timestamps, and it may be correct that the mock stuff goes the same way, also desiring to use timestamps. So Mo's point is well taken. I think the chairs would be in Quick would be sympathetic to people expressing views about this and saying some variation of we need this for media because we're using timestamps anyway. But thank you for bringing that up, Mo.
So Spencer, are you asking for your draft to be adopted at this time, or do you want to continue doing it as an individual?
My goal, now that we have our own working group draft for Quick over SDP over RTP over Quick.
Yeah.
How many stacks are we talking about here?
Yeah.
But now that we have our own working group draft, my goal would be to try to keep my draft synchronized with the working group protocol specification, like within a meeting cycle. And so I would like to get my draft coordinated with the working group draft protocol specification by the next time we have a Avtcore meeting. Are we having an interim? And whenever that is, and ask the working group to consider adoption at that point. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, V3C, who's presenting? Laurie, go ahead.
I'm going to be presenting, so this is Lauri Ilola. Can you hear me right?
Yes, I can hear you. Maybe a little louder, if you can.
No?
Yeah, that's good.
Can someone confirm that?
Yes, we can hear you.
me?
Thank you. Yes. Can you hear us?
Okay, so at least someone confirmed that they're hearing me. So I'm going to be presenting the progress on the RTP payload format for V3C. Next slide, please. So just as a brief background, we first brought this topic to Avtcore in a virtual meeting in February this year. And since then, we've been receiving some amount of feedback, not much. Just as a quick refresher, so this V3C encoding is like intending to reuse existing 2D video coding technologies and compress a volumetric video using that. And it is in fact designed to be video codec agnostic, so you can use pretty much any video codec available. So what it does is it decomposes a 3D volumetric video frame into video components and Atlas component, the Atlas component being mostly metadata, which describes how the video components can be reprojected back into the video, back into the 3D space. The compression of this Atlas metadata is defined in this ISO standard, and its high-level syntax, or syntax rather, is represented as null units that are very similar to HEVC or VVC null units. Next slide, please. So the way we proposed and planned to develop this V3C RTP payload format is therefore also aligned with the video coding specifications. So the video components can be streamed according to the respective RTP payload specifications. Again, you can pretty much use whatever video codec you want to use and then choose the corresponding RFC for the payload format. The issue is that there currently is no RTP payload format for this Atlas data, which is the metadata that describes the reprojection of these video components back into the 3D frame. And therefore, we were proposing to define an encapsulation for these Atlas null units into RTP packets. Along with that, we propose some V3C specific payload format parameters, which operate just the same way as video coding payload format parameters do. Then in addition, there's a new grouping type that we are proposing, which allows you to group multiple video component streams and Atlas streams together to indicate that these streams, media streams, should be consumed together. And lastly, there's this reference to bundling, which is using this RFC 8843, which essentially allows you to bundle these multiple streams into a single session or a single stream. Next slide, please. So since we first introduced the topic, we've received some amount of feedback. So the first feedback was from the meeting, and based on that, we refined the payload format. So we removed a lot of the stuff that was inherited from HEVC RTP payload format, and then, for example, dropped the multi-time aggregation package and refined the payload format parameters section and so on. So essentially just cleaned it up a bit. And after that, we've only received a couple of minor improvements, just suggestions, mostly focusing on editorial stuff. And just as a reminder, so we're managing this feedback on this behind this GitHub link. Next slide, please. So in order to solicit more feedback and continue to progress the draft, we would like to propose a working group adoption at this point. I hope that is something that we can all agree to. And yeah, now any questions or comments?
Anybody? Stefan?
So this is within, as far as I can understand, within the scope of the working group. So, and it's sufficiently mature, so I have no problems in adopting it. I have one other thing, and that is, Laurie, you will soon run into the same issue which the green metadata people ran into a few weeks ago, and that is the public availability of ISO documents for free. I can offer my service there again to distribute that Point Cloud people sent me a late pre-ballot draft or pointer to it on the MPEG site, an N document, a November document. And people who want to review this ISO document, this ISO standard, can contact me privately, and I will forward it to those people. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. All right, so yeah, I think it sounds like certainly is in scope. So I suspect, I think what we should do is we should do a call for adoption on the mailing list. This will give you a chance to also, you know, the community that's interested in this can express their interest, but it's certainly in scope. So I think we'll do a call for adoption. Unless you disagree, Bernard, but I think.
I think we need to move on to the next
we do, yeah, we're tight on time. All right, so yeah, finally, green metadata. Sorry for, you know, making you a little tight on time here, but let's.
All right, so I try to be on time.
Okay.
I'm Bakar, and this is about RTCP messages for green metadata. Next slide, please. So this is about the MPEG specification.
Can you move closer to the mic?
So
yeah, try to be right on axis.
All right.
Yeah.
I hope this works better now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So this is about the ISO specification 23001-11, which is energy efficient media consumption. So this is talking about how encoding and decoding can be done in a more energy efficient fashion. So this specification provides two sets of metadata. One is this video encoder generated, which is complexity information being sent to the decoder so that it can, you know, adapt its decoding. But these sets of metadata sent via supplemented SEI within the video stream. So this is not the focus of the draft here. The focus of this draft is a second set of metadata, which is the decoder feedback messages. So the decoder sends some feedback, and encoder tries to adopt accordingly the energy consumption at the decoding end. So we needed a format for those messages because there is no RTCP format defined for this, and this is the format that is being specified, outlined by this draft, and the current version is linked here. This draft is providing two new RTCP messages. One is temporal spatial resolution request, and the other one is the feedback message from the encoder, which is the temporal spatial resolution notification. Next slide, please. So the new messages are specified in a similar fashion to the payload specific feedback messages, which are defined in AVPF. So as mentioned, the two new messages, they can be sent as a full compound RTCP packet or an early RTCP packet. The reason being is that these messages are not very time critical. You can send them as early RTCP messages if the application so needs, but this is not required. And then the main idea is that the first message on the top, this is what the decoder sends towards the encoder when it wants the encoder to adapt the energy, the decoder energy consumption. And this is done via this typical message format, SSRC, sequence number. And then obviously these are the key elements here: frame rate, picture width, picture height, which is the request that the decoder is sending. Okay, please adopt to this new resolution or frame rate. And then as these messages go, there is a feedback message from the encoder back to the decoder. It has similar information fields here, but the reason of these information fields is that the encoder might be trying to adopt from multiple decoders, so it might have a different decision to do. So it informs the decoder, hey, this is what I've done with your request. So next slide, please. Some comments about timing and security. So as mentioned before, the encoder might be catering for multiple decoders. So if there are multiple messages coming in, then the encoder needs to decide, joint need of optimization. So one decoder is saying that, another one is saying that. So the encoder has to make a decision. As mentioned before, messages are not time critical. So they're sent using regular RTCP timing. Some security considerations have been documented in this draft, which is if the message is spoofed or there's a malicious message, the decoder might request the malicious message might request a extremely low video quality, or we just recently were thinking it could be a request for extremely high video quality that the whole decoding can stall. So yes, some integrity protection authentication is required. That can be done in a very similar fashion to AVPF as using SRTP or SAVPF. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's the last slide that I have. So that's the purpose, to gather feedback. We already have some feedback comments from Jonathan that we mostly acknowledge, and we are already working on a draft to implement that. The target is to have more reflective discussion and then incorporate this feedback, and eventually, when the time comes, seek for an adoption. Yes, George.
Yeah, you're good. I have one quick question. RTCP messages aren't reliable. So are you sending this as kind of soft state that you keep repeating what you expect continuously? Since you have this transaction, right? The receiver sends something, the decoder sends a wish to the encoder. The encoder at some point would respond. How does the decoder know that the encoder ever got what it was sending? So since there's no acknowledgement in RTCP, do you repeat this on a constant basis until things get better? Or I didn't find anything in the draft when I was quickly grabbing through it.
So,
but I might have missed stuff. So.
Yeah, so these messages are working in a very similar way as the tuple spatial trade-off request message in AVPF. Almost identical fashion. So the decoder sends a message with a specific sequence number. The encoder is supposed to reply to that sequence number. So that's how the decoder finds out that for a given SSRC, for a specific sequence number, it got the message. The encoder got the message.
Yeah, and I had some questions as an individual. First, thanks to Stefan when he sent me the ISO document. I see that there's actually 4 different feedback mechanisms in that document, but you're only doing one at this point. Is that all you're intending to do, or is this just your starting point and you're planning to do some of the others as well?
Yeah, I think we picked the most important thing that we found at this point in time. It could be based on feedback if people think there are more messages.
Okay, if you think this is the one that's the most important, that seems reasonable. I just wanted to see what your plans were going forward. And then the other is, there are some mechanisms, I'm not sure, I seem to recall at the SDP level to specify things like frame rate and resolution to negotiate that at the signaling level. And I want to know, to what extent is this complementary to that versus overlapping it?
I would think this is complementary. So STP is then how you're setting up the session.
Yeah.
Then this is more, I think this can work together with it. So
Okay.
then the decoder is sending some messages. So.
And the third question I just had is there any IPR on this that needs to be disclosed?
So Qualcomm made a IPR statement.
They have? Okay, I didn't see it, so we should, I'll check that out. Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, and if that, so you're not asking for adoption yet. You want to do some more revisions and then?
Yes, the idea is getting more feedback, and eventually we would like to seek adoption, but when we cross that bridge.
Okay, thank you. All right, great. Well, I think that then wraps us up, unless anybody has any other business in the 1 minute we have left. Otherwise, thank you all. We'll discuss whether we need an interim. We've been doing interims fairly successfully lately, but once per cycle. So we may do that again, depending on how things are progressing. Otherwise, we will see you all in London. Thank you all very much. Bernard?
Thank you. Thank you. See you.